Now that he was free to explore this strange new universe, or rather, the one he had called his home for the past several hundred years, but had never bothered to explore before now, due to his general apathy with life. The magician's old, adventurous spirit, from his years with Fang, returned. He'd never truly get over Lindsay or the loss of his daughter, but as the chance to learn about new worlds and life forms opened up, Richard Marsters actually found himself enjoying his life once again. That's not to say there wouldn't be more hardships in store for him. The universe humanity had chosen as its salvation, whilst beautiful in many ways, also contained magical horrors that even Marsters, despite everything he had seen with Professor Fang, found overwhelming. Still, at the very least, he wasn't just content to sit back and mourn for his old life anymore. Among the worst and most persistent creatures Marsters and his comrades encountered were the Rasseliacs. They were also among the first they encountered, too, a mere few months after leaving Zenkia. Prior to meeting these creatures, it had been relatively smooth sailing through the cosmos, with the planets Marsters and the others encountered being more exotic and strange than truly dangerous. The Rasseliacs, however, would change everything for the magician. These monsters were the remains of a once humanoid race, who were killed off in a war with a species known as the Calcanta. It is not known what caused the war, but it had been raging for aeons, with many other species becoming caught in the crossfire or taking sides. Eventually, the Rasseliacs' closest allies, the Tharka, betrayed them, as they wanted the war to end above all else, and foolishly believed the Calcanta leaders, who said they simply wanted peace. The Calcanta instead were utterly merciless towards the Rasseliacs, and the Tharka too. They enslaved the latter and slaughtered the Rasseliacs completely, even after they finally surrendered, with a weapon that destroyed their entire world. Most souls of deceased creatures in each universe within the magical realm are sent through portals contained in every magical universe that are simply known as fortresses, after the forms they take. The fortresses are believed to have been created by the people of the Green Mist, with each fortress's purpose being to send the spirits of the deceased to the great beyond, the final resting place for all souls in the Omniverse. It is possible, however, to still bind spirits to certain worlds, using the most powerful magics. No one is sure exactly why the people of the Green Mist created the fortresses. It was in an uncharacteristic act of kindness on their part, though many believed it was most likely to stop the spirits of the deceased from cluttering the worlds they created. The last of the Rasseliacs, meanwhile, thanks to one of their greatest soldiers, Axvor, were able to evade being pulled into the fortress. We will explore exactly how later. The last of the spirits of the Rasseliacs, led by Axvor, then traveled across the universe until they found another dead world to settle on. There, they hid for centuries and traveled to other planets in secret to steal magic, as naturally, the dead world they were hiding on had no magic of its own, and was literally a rock floating aimlessly through the beautiful golden space of this reality. In time, the ghosts of the Rasseliacs under Axvor's leadership not only restored the dead planet, but built a huge city and finally new bodies for themselves. These bodies physically looked as though they were made almost entirely of glass, except for metal rims around certain sections of their bodies and their hands. All of their technology, from their cities, to their weapons, to their ships, were made of glass too. In truth, however, these new bodies possessed incredible strength, due to being powered by the magic from many planets, with their souls being contained in the metal realms. The magics also were fused to the very souls of each Rasseliac, and could be visible through their glass bodies and heads, as a form of energy that flashed in sync whenever they spoke, with their voices now sounding like a somewhat unnerving, whispering sing-song pattern of speech. In the case of the drones, the magical energy appeared blue due to their more basic souls, whilst in the lieutenant's case, it appeared red, and in the commander's, it appeared black, due to the greater concentration of magic. Finally, Axvor's energy appeared gold, as he was the emperor of the new Rasseliacs, with his casing also being larger and more robust. He also possessed a long, silver cape made entirely of concentrated magic as well. The Rasseliacs were also able to find a way to create new members of their kind through special machines, which not only created new bodies, but souls to inhabit them too. The majority of the new Rasseliacs, however, were actually nothing more than drones, as the original surviving Rasseliacs, who made up the High Council under Axvor, conditioned only a few, literally 1 in every 1,000, to be able to actually think for itself, with the rest functioning as slaves, and later foot soldiers and warriors. Whenever a Rasseliac was killed, its spirit would be sent to the Rasseliac's new city, and they would be given 3 more chances. If they failed a 3rd time, their spirits were sent to the fortress, with lieutenants being granted 5 lives and commanders being granted 7. Ironically, the Rasseliacs became a far greater and more powerful race than ever before thanks to the combination of magics they had drained from other planets, and the fact that they could now reproduce at a much greater rate. Sadly, however, the destruction of their world had warped the Rasseliacs' mentality. Under the leadership of Axvor, the Rasseliacs now saw themselves as above all other species due to the fact that they had, essentially, crawled back from extinction and been reborn stronger than ever. They claimed it was their duty to test other species and see if they could reinvent themselves after similarly being brought to the brink of extinction. These glass creatures would bombard the planet with the most terrible and horrific curses, which they were experts at creating, like no other race in the known omniverse. Those who managed to overcome the curse would then be conquered by the Rasseliacs, who claimed that they were rewarding them for passing their test by elevating these lesser species, simply by making them part of their ever-expanding empire. Whilst they did give the planets they conquered protection, ultimately, the monsters would still enslave the natives and drain each planet of its magics to further power and improve on their machines and weapons. Ironically, it was only the races they thought had the potential that they tested by raining destruction and catastrophe down on them to see if they could overcome it. Lesser races they simply subjugated as a slave force or wiped out, if need be, to get their magic. In truth, the Rasseliacs were bitter and full of hatred, not just against the invaders who had destroyed their world, but the universe at large that they felt had turned against them when their species was exterminated, and clearly enjoyed making other advanced races suffer. Even the lowliest drones were still capable of cruelty and sadism. Sadly, those elements had not been removed from their personalities, like free will. The magician's first encounter with these monsters, meanwhile, began when the boat came upon several planets that were slowly dying. The Rasseliacs had found a way to drain the magic from several worlds remotely. It was their greatest ever weapon, and one that they had spent centuries building with the resources of hundreds of planets. Indeed, many lesser worlds had been drained and destroyed completely in order to simply build the weapon, and many more sacrificed in testing it out. The magician and his crew were able to locate the source of the weapon, after which the magician temporarily blocked it. Sadly, however, even he underestimated the Rasseliac's power, and his ship was badly damaged in the process and crashed onto one of the nearby devastated worlds that had been completely twisted by the Rasseliac's interference, to the point where all of its inhabitants had mutated into hideous monsters. The magician and his companions were only barely able to hold off the monsters, as they tried to repair the boat and were ironically saved by a Rasseliac scout ship, who captured the travelers and their vessel. They were subsequently taken to the Rasseliac's glass city, where the magician met what would become his archenemy, Axvor, for the first time. The Emperor was instantly fascinated with these strange creatures, who contained a more ancient, primeval form of magic from another universe, whilst the magician and his companions were all subject to torturous experiments at Axvor's hands. Before the intergalactic tyrant could truly harness their magic, his base was attacked by numerous slaves and creatures working in the mines on the Rasseliac's planet. They had escaped the camps when the magician disrupted the weapon. Whilst the rebellion had mostly been crushed, a few had managed to persevere and launch a decisive strike against the Emperor's palace. The magician and the others subsequently escaped in the confusion and worked with the former slaves to try and bring down the Rasseliacs. Sadly, they failed, but the magician was still able to destroy the Rasseliac's weapon completely and even help a handful of the slaves escape from their planet. The loss of the weapon not only set the Rasseliacs back centuries, but many of the slaves who had worked on their most important projects that escaped would also share information to their enemies. In fact, one escaped slave, a young man named Offslak, went on to become one of the greatest resistance fighters against the Rasseliacs Empire, and an important ally of the magician, helping him many times, not just against these monsters, but other threats too. Axvor, meanwhile, vowed revenge, and ordered all of his soldiers to find out whatever they could about the magician's home planet. These creatures spent months monitoring the magician, in secret, knowing that he would never break under torture. They soon were able to trace the source of the trail of magic he left behind from his home planet, or rather, his adopted planet, in this universe, Zinkia. The monsters then invaded Zinkia and were able to conquer it. They slaughtered billions of humans and devastated entire cities. Tragically, in his attempt to protect his new home from the dangers of the magic realm, the magician had inadvertently brought it to the attention of the most evil creatures in that part of the galaxy. The Rasseliacs ruled over Zinkia for 3 years, with the magician, who was on the other side of the cosmos, being none the wiser. He was eventually tracked down by a young woman named Trau, who was part of the human resistance that had ultimately been ruthlessly crushed, with its leaders condemned to the most horrific curses by the Rasseliacs that ensured they would suffer for all eternity. Just before their defeat, however, the rebels had learned the truth about how the Rasseliacs had discovered Zinkia. Trau at first wanted to track down the magician and make him pay for what she felt was a betrayal to his people. Revenge was all she had left after the death of her friends. And since she knew she would seemingly never have her revenge against the Rasseliacs, she focused all of her energy and hatred against him. The magician was naturally devastated to learn what had happened, and how he had failed in the very mission Professor Fang had set out for him. Now it did seem to be all for nothing. He was so devastated, he didn't fight back when Trau wanted to kill him. But fortunately, Shobna not only saved the magician, she convinced him that they had to go back to Zinkia to save the last of humanity, with the magician at that point not being sure if they could. Still, Shobna managed to convince him, as she also felt tremendous guilt. The travelers working with Trau were able to overthrow the Rasseliacs by using magic from the fortress which the magician had visited on a previous journey. He was trying to help a young ghost girl escape the magic of the fortress so she could reunite with her parents after being killed on an expedition into space. He, and the rest of his companions, knew nothing of the fortress at that point, and assumed it was a malevolent force. But the fortress was eventually able to overpower the magician's ship, and brought him and the others to it, where it showed them the truth, and the ghost girl willingly crossed over to the great beyond. The fortress seemingly left behind a tiny fraction of its power in the magician's ship. Whether this was an accident or deliberate is still not completely known. Either way, the magician was able to fuse this power to the mainframe of the invading forces. The combination of magic directly from the fortress, and not filtered across the universe, and the primeval magics of our reality, overran the Rasseliacs and dragged most of their soldiers on Zinkia into the fortress, where they were cast into the great beyond. Zinkia remained safe from further invasion afterwards, thanks to the fortress and magic being fused to its force field, and in time, humanity would once again rebuild and recover, becoming stronger in this universe than ever before. The magician and the others weren't exactly hailed as heroes. Most had the same reaction as Trau, blaming the magician for leading the monsters to their world and for abandoning them too. Whilst the magician wanted to stay behind and help, ultimately, he and his companions were forced to flee. That is, except for Shobna. She insisted that the magician leave her back among her people. Her continent had been hit particularly badly by the Rasseliacs, due to its larger concentration of magic, as it had been the first landmass created when Zinkia was born, and was, in essence, the heart of this world. Sadly, Shobna's home, as a result, had also become a lot more twisted and was essentially a no-man's land of curses, monsters, and mutations. Shobna felt she had to make it up to her people, and with regret, the magician left her. It would take another 30 years before Shobna was able to establish a new society in her homeland, which she did not lead, but rather was led, by a new council. Still, it's no exaggeration to say that she essentially rebuilt her homeland and helped to establish order again, though those are stories for another time. Meanwhile, whilst the rest of humanity may have not forgiven the magician, At the very least, Trow did, and she subsequently joined him on his travels. Also, ironically, her support of the magician after seeing what a hero he truly was against the Rasseliacs made her a pariah. The Rasseliacs were sadly still able to use magic from Xankia that they had harnessed from the planet, which made them even more powerful than ever before. While Xankia may have been freed, hundreds more worlds would fall as a result of their invasion of Xankia. The magician had many more battles with them over the ensuing centuries, but sadly, he was never able to completely eliminate their influence. After the failure of the invasion of Xankia, the Rasseliacs took over the fortress of their universe, and were able to use its power to divert souls they deemed unworthy into the darkest hell dimensions to suffer for all eternity, including, sadly, many they had killed from Xankia. In the case of their old enemies, the Calcanta, whose planet they had already conquered years ago and subjected to the worst torture, they finally wiped them out and condemned all of their souls to hell as punishment. The Tharka, meanwhile, were spared being sent to hell, but were still twisted by the Rasseliacs' curses into hideous monstrosities, and used as foot soldiers in the Rasseliacs' war against the rest of the universe. The magician learned that the Rasseliacs had been tampering with the fortress when numerous ghosts who became lost in the universe, in an attempt to avoid being pulled into hell, began attacking ships. Whilst the magician was ultimately able to sever the Rasseliacs' control over the fortress, the glass aliens were able to steal a very important part of the magic of the fortress in the process. A particular spell that only the people of the Green Mist had access to, which, unlike all other forms of magic, could attach itself to the very fabric of the magical realm itself. This spell was key to the fortress being able to absorb all other souls. The Rasseliacs hoped to use this spell to fuse their magics with the fabric of the magic realm instead, and to become gods. Not only would they be able to rule the magical realm forever, but they would also become powerful enough to conquer all other realms too. In order to fuse their spell to the magic of the realm, the Rasseliacs needed more magic than even they had access to, and were forced to ally themselves with numerous other monsters and dark empires in the universe, all of whom they intended to betray, which made them almost unstoppable. Tragically, over the course of this battle with the glass monsters, Calicus, in many respects the son the magician never had, was killed. He sacrificed himself to destroy the Rasseliacs' weapon, just as it was completed. He died saving the entire Omniverse, though sadly, very few people other than the magician or his companions were aware of it. Whilst Calicus stopped the monsters from gaining absolute control of the magical realm, the activation of their weapon alone led to a huge disturbance throughout the entire magical realm, which not only mutated the magics of certain worlds, and destroyed others. It also led to the barriers of the magician's universe breaking down, and the Black Ocean to enter it at certain points. Angry at the order of things being disturbed, the section of the Black Ocean that was released would attempt to consume all life in the universe, and subsequently became one of the magician's worst enemies. It seemed to despise him above all else, for earlier evading it, and first attacking one of his favorite worlds when he was holidaying there. The magician never forgot the horrifying sight of a black tidal wave emerging from the sky to cover the world below, and his failure to save 7 billion people on it from the angry sea. The Black Ocean, in some respects, was one of the magician's most dangerous enemies, as it was capable of infecting and transforming any life into one of its servants. Whilst these servants could be destroyed, the main wave itself was virtually indestructible, as it could regrow if just one cell of it survived. In addition to this, whilst the Rasseliac superweapon was destroyed and could not be replicated, as it required the magics from hundreds of worlds, the monsters were still able to take advantage of the chaos, and conquered many more planets, becoming a greater force in the universe than ever before. This led to many more battles with the magician, who had developed a hatred for and obsession with destroying these monsters unlike any other. In addition to the Rasseliacs and the Black Sea, the Lehania would prove to be a recurring threat for the magician and his companions. Whilst not an advanced species like the Rasseliacs, these monsters physically were among the strongest of all the magician's enemies. Each Lehania stood roughly 9 feet tall and weighed in at 800 pounds. They were covered in thick, long, dark hair, whilst their teeth were silver and appeared to be made of metal and could cut through almost any substance. Their most unusual feature, however, was a giant single green eye that could drain the magic from their victims' bodies. The beast would often use their eyes to remove any unique magical powers from an enemy and store them in their eyes for later use, which allowed certain sects of Lehania to gain unique powers over the course of their invasions. Each eye, which was bigger on the inside, could store several 100,000 spells at a time. It could also store the souls of their victims too, if a Lehania chose to remove them before devouring the victim's body. In certain Lehania, the victim's souls could be seen in their eyes, screaming to be let out. As a result, Lehania's eyes were highly prized among other creatures, due to their magical properties, though acquiring them was obviously a very difficult task. The magician kept one on the boat and regularly used it to extract powerful and dangerous magics. The eyes were virtually indestructible and rock-like in structure. Dankaj, much to his horror after encountering the leader of the Lehania that invaded Zenkia years prior to his journeys through space, learned that the monsters had kept the soul of the man he loved and other members of his platoon in its eyes for years. The Lehania kept them prisoner so that it could drain the unique magics from our universe in an extremely torturous process. He also condemned them to constant torment within the eye through hallucinations of their worst fears to keep them docile and distracted. Though Dankaj was able to slay the monster and free his platoon, the suffering the man he loved more than anything had been through for years led to Dankaj developing an obsession with ridding the universe of these monstrosities, much like the magician's attitude towards the Rasseliacs. Whilst Dankaj helped kill scores of them and save millions of people, sadly, he was put at odds with the magician as a result, who understood the threat these monsters posed. But unlike the Rasseliacs, he could also see that they were also under a curse and desperately sought to try and find a way to cure them. Normally, Dankaj was the voice of reason among the magician's companions. Whilst he and the magician had not got off to the best start, he was nevertheless the most genuinely kind-hearted and understanding of the crew, certainly when compared to the somewhat reckless and arrogant magician and the hot-headed Troll. Varkania, meanwhile, was somewhat mysterious and preferred to focus on her own agendas, which we shall explore later. Calicus, on the other hand, despite their past estrangement, tended to view the magician as more of a father figure and followed everything he did. Finally, even Shobna, much like the magician, was somewhat arrogant and dismissive. Despite claiming to have traveled with the magician to escape being royalty, it took her a long while to overcome it. Sadly, however, the trauma Dankaj had endured at these ravenous monsters' hands from his first loss alone, never mind what his men and lover had endured, haunted him, to the point where his obsession with destroying the Lehania became his only way of overcoming it. Over the course of their journeys, the magician was eventually able to discover where the Lehania came from, or at least where they had been transformed into the ravenous monsters they now were, a large forest floating in the universe itself. Again, due to the magical realm's more chaotic and unpredictable nature, what defined a world was not always as clear-cut or as consistent as our reality. The forest, as it was simply known, had once been a thriving environment, but was overrun by the Lehania, who, ironically, had once been its protectors. The reason the Lehania had been cursed with their insatiable hunger was because they defended the forest from its creators, the people of the Green Mist, who had only created it as an arena. The people would bring monsters and creatures from all over the magical realm to the forest and trap them there, with the creatures' only way of escape being to kill the others. The people of the Green Mist would then, after having their fun watching the new creatures fight, travel the magical realm and return every 100 years to see whatever creature or race of creatures had survived the conflict. And those who were abducted's home planets were also destroyed as well. If there were still multiple races after 100 years, they would be being rewarded with great powers to create their new world. Though if said world failed to live up to the people of the Green Mist's expectations, they would be made to fight in the contest again. The Lehania, however, who were originally savage creatures on their homeworld, surprisingly, were able to bring stability to the forest for the first time and united its creatures. Normally, the people of the Green Mist were so careful in the monsters they selected to be part of their games, only choosing creatures that they believed had failed in the universe, with the Lehania being in their mind degenerates who had never progressed beyond their barbarian stage, whilst the Lehania were able to temporarily drive the people of the Green Mist away by using their own magics in the forest against them. The people eventually got their revenge by cursing them with their insatiable hunger, which led to the Lehania wiping out most of the other creatures of the forest, and then going on to consume other worlds. Varkania's people, a race of fairly primitive humanoids, had been destroyed in a previous contest before the arrival of the Lehania, and she only survived by being able to flee when the forest came under attack from previous winners of the contest, who came to reset the idea of any other winners. Varkania would travel the universe for centuries, extending her lifespan in the process, and utilizing whatever magic she could, in the hopes of getting revenge against the people of the Green Mist. Which was the real reason she had arrived in Zinkia in the first place, to gain access to its unique magic. Although she did at least save Dankaj's platoon from another threat that had followed her here, something she always kept secret, though we shall explore what became of her later. The Lehania's hunger wasn't just overwhelming, it twisted their personalities too, turning some of them into savage animals, whilst others became cruel, sadistic versions of themselves. The magic of the forest is also what allowed them to travel across the galaxy, despite their low-level technology, after descending back into animals. The people of the Mist did not return to the forest, as they felt it served its purpose more as a base for the Lehania, who could serve as a better way to cleanse the universe of weaker species and mistakes of the people. The magician, however, was able to capture a sample of the curse from the forest, and would spend many years working on a cure with Varkania, who knew more about the people of the Green Mist magic than anyone else. Eventually, he was able to test this cure out in a war with the largest army of Lehania. Dankaj was utterly horrified to see the curse succeed and transform Lehania into a peaceful and kind creature once again. He thought back to all the Lehania he had killed, and whilst in most cases he had no choice, the fact that he had enjoyed it and been so militant in his war made him now desperate to try and redeem these monsters. He would stay behind with the resistance against the Lehania army and use the magician's cure. In time, he would, ironically, be responsible for curing more of the Lehania than anyone else. Along with the magician himself, he also ensured that the cure was spread throughout the universe. Sadly, the Lehania were never cured completely. Many of them didn't want to be cured and embraced the curse that made them stronger and a force to be reckoned with. Still, Dankaj was able to free thousands from the unrelenting horror the people of the Green Mist had created, and both redeemed himself and honored the man he loved in a more fitting way. The magician would also have many run-ins with the people of the Green Mist as well. During these battles, he would learn the truth about why Varkania had joined him, when she very nearly accidentally caused her shipmate's death during a battle with the people of the Green Mist, in a reckless attempt to have her revenge. Whilst he felt betrayed, ultimately, she was not cast out of the boat due to her friendship with Dankaj, who never learned the truth. But after he left, she became more reckless, until eventually she was able to strike a killing blow against the people of the Green Mist, using a weapon made up of earth magic, the Rasseliacs power, and a sample of the Black Sea. She had been developing this toxic cocktail in secret, with even the magician being terrified of its power. At first, it greatly weakened the people of the Green Mist power, until only a few remained, and Varkania and even the magician, despite his disagreements with her, felt relieved at their power being depleted. Sadly, however, they later learned that as evil as the people of the Green Mist were, they were necessary for the survival of all life in the magical realm. If their home was destroyed, and all of their numbers perished, then the planets they created would begin to wither and die, and many worlds suffering famines and droughts and diseases as a result. The magician and Varkania were fortunately able to undo the effect of her curse before the last of the people of the Green Mist died. However, the effects on worlds throughout the magical realm were devastating, and Varkania became determined to make it up to the other worlds, and would leave the magician to help out on several of them. She would later not only work with him many more times, but eventually reunite with the magician hundreds of years later and become his traveling companion a second time, with the two forming a much stronger friendship during that period.